Karen. Okay. Today I am about to pass over to Gün, who works with the Scottish Refugee Council, and has kindly agreed to share with us the council's work in supporting refugees into volunteering. The presentation will last around 15 to 20 minutes, and after that there'll be an opportunity to have a question and answer session. So just a reminder that if you have any questions at all for Gün during the presentation, please pop them into the chat, and then we can move on to talk about them later on. So I will now hand over to Gün. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me along. There are a few familiar faces on screen, which is always nice. But hopefully we'll get to know the rest of you a little bit by the end of today. Can I also introduce my colleague, Daniel, who is center bottom on my screen. I don't know where he sits in yours. Wave, Daniel. He's got the colourful background. Daniel works with me at Scottish Refugee Council. We are 2/3 of our volunteering coordination team represented today. I job share my post with Rosanne Alexander, who's not here today, as volunteer development coordinators, overseeing volunteering across the organisation and overseeing improving refugees' access to volunteering opportunities in other organisations, which is what we're doing today. And Daniel has operational responsibility for our largest team of volunteers directly, which is our advice volunteers, our casework volunteers. So I'm sure he'd be happy to answer questions if you have any questions, particularly about that aspect of our work too. I do have a presentation, but before I share that, I wanted to ask, I didn't include any information about Scottish Refugee Council itself in the presentation. Is everyone more or less familiar with the organisation, or should I say a few words about the organisation? Wave if you'd like me to talk about SRC first. Okay, I'll try to be brief. I have warned David and Erin that brevity is not one of my virtues, so I will need to try and control myself. Somewhat familiar in Aberdeen. I have to say, Claire, I'm excited to see someone from Aberdeen Art Gallery because I love the Aberdeen Art Gallery. I haven't been to it in years, but I particularly like it. So Scottish Refugee Council is a charity. It's Glasgow based at the moment, started in Edinburgh in the 80s with a group of volunteers supporting refugee resettlement at the time from Vietnam, so-called Vietnamese boat people at the time, and then supporting people coming over from Chile, from Pinochet regime, and then charitable status and widening its services. And its remit is Scotland-wide. It has since gradually drifted to Glasgow and is now a Glasgow-based organisation with a satellite group in Dundee, supporting the latest resettlement of Syrians coming into Scotland 5 years ago. We have a range of services. We are mostly an advice agency. We don't give immigration advice, we give welfare advice about people's rights and entitlements through the asylum process and after gaining refugee status, about employability, housing, education, all sorts of things, benefits, a lot of destitution advice, unfortunately, prevention, homelessness, that sort of thing. We do have an external training function, and we do have also a policy and research team. So we work advising Scottish Government quite a lot of matters. So Parliament, certainly Scottish Parliament, to a certain extent the Westminster Parliament, quite a lot of advocacy and campaigning. So quite a broad remit really, and even though our remit is Scotland-wide, de facto we are pretty Glasgow-centric, unfortunately, so it would be great to be able to reach beyond the borders of Glasgow where our office is based through meetings like this. Actually get information and connections elsewhere would be really valuable for us. I'll leave organizational talk there and move on to the presentation today. But if you have any questions at the end relating to the organization, maybe we can recap there as well. Let me share my screen. Can everyone see the presentation with the blue Scottish Refugee Council all over it? Yeah, okay. So today we're talking about involving refugee volunteers and organizations, and I have fancifully wrote the caption, the right to volunteer there. Volunteer, it's a complicated one. It's not a legal right, but it's not legally prevented either, if you see what I mean. And this comes into play not with every group of people, but it certainly can come into play with people we serve, people who are in the asylum process, who are quite often told they can't volunteer for one reason or another. There's an assumption that it would be complex, it would be impossible, it might be discouraged by the Home Office. However, it is, I'd like to argue throughout the presentation, demonstrate, I hope, that this is not the case, that there is nothing preventing people anywhere in the asylum process at any point, even after being refused asylum, being able to volunteer. So the law only interferes with volunteering if volunteering interferes with somebody's employment right. So if it's job replacement, for example, in which case the volunteer's immigration status is irrelevant anyway. It's the employment right of the person not being employed that would be an issue. But that's quite a key point for us to make, that people can volunteer. After refugee status, you have all the rights of a British citizen anyway, so volunteering is included in that. But throughout the asylum process, it's actually quite explicit in Home Office guidance that people can volunteer. There's nothing preventing people volunteering wherever you're in the asylum process. We do have some guidance that we published a while ago, we worked on with Volunteer Scotland as part of that very large mouthful of a title, their National Strategic Group for Inclusion and Volunteering. I'm not expecting you to be able to read that picture on the screen. This is hyperlinked and I will send the presentation. And that's quite a good link to have, because it's actually not just guidance document by ourselves, but quite a few organizations who represent groups that are underrepresented will have prepared 10 top tips on involving people in drugs recovery, disabled people, young people, people with hearing or sight issues, for example. So there's quite a lot of detailed guidance you can access there. And certainly I can see Tracy from Volunteer Glasgow on the screen today. Your local volunteer centre will have local guidance and someone who can probably talk to you about inclusion there as well. But that's our guidance there. And I will talk through some of the areas we mentioned in the guidance today. And you can see either our website or the Volunteer Scotland website for more details as well. So I'd always start with, anytime you're going to recruit volunteers, take a moment to think why we're involving volunteers in any case. And that certainly applies to why are we thinking about involving refugee volunteers. And there's a list of questions there that are both a nudge for you to think about these, and also in the hope that your answer to all of these is possibly yes, I would like to do that. So are you going to involve refugee volunteers because you'd like more language skills in the organization? And volunteers, the refugee volunteers can be, or migrant volunteers generally, can be a good way to bring in language skills into your organization. Would you like to involve refugee volunteers because you want to actually offer your services to refugees? Perhaps you're an advice agency that is open to everyone, including refugees, but refugees just don't come to your organization. It could be a good way if you have volunteers from a certain community, then you may have footfall from that community in your organization. And I think a lot of museums are interested, generally in the heritage sector, in that aspect. I've certainly worked with the Burrell Collection years and years ago when it was open, that they recruited a number of refugee and migrant volunteers who were supported to devise museum tours in their own language, and then they were also supported to recruit people to come along to their tours. So they were hoping to include people from underrepresented language groups to come into the museum. And the Scottish Civic Trust did that before lockdown with during Glasgow Open Day. There were Farsi tour organised and led by 2 refugee women of the city chambers. And they weren't massively attended. It was a small number in both tours, but they were hugely enjoyed, and it was certainly a very valuable experience for the 2 women. One of them certainly has, wrote for a newspaper about it and spoke to the media about it and went on to be a very, very motivated volunteer in different places after the experience. And generally, would you like to involve refugee volunteers or really volunteers from any underrepresented groups? Because it's just the right thing to do. There's an ethical motivation behind there. You probably would say yes to one or all of these questions. I would presume that's why you're here today. Okay, this is the first barrier that people face. I even have service users, people in the asylum process, coming into the office in the olden days when they could do that, and saying, I'd like to volunteer, but I think it's illegal. I don't think I'm allowed. It's such a heavily restricted group of people because of their immigration status that people almost assume they are not allowed things. That's the default position. I probably am not allowed to do that. So it almost takes encouragement from ourselves, from other organizations, to say to people, if you are allowed to volunteer, we would like you to volunteer. We can assure you and reassure you that volunteering is something you can do and you're not going to run into trouble because you wish to volunteer. And the Home Office guidance on the subject, the link is always correct. They keep updating it. This is the last update I checked this morning. It does include the line, it is Home Office policy to support asylum seekers volunteering for charities or public sector organizations. So what's excluded in that list is any private sector organization, which don't typically have volunteering programs anyway. And there's been contention with large scale sports organizations such as the Commonwealth Games. Where was the funding coming from? Is it a public sector organization? So there's some question mark areas, but if you're a charity or a council or public sector organization, there is no issue with involving someone in the asylum process who has no recourse to public funds. And again, hyperlinked. So I will send this along and you can have a look at it if you wish. Okay. My presentation is being sticky. Okay. The next technical question people ask me usually when involving volunteers is, okay, we'd like disclosures. Do our volunteers need PVGs? What do we do then? And the answer in Scotland to that, in England, Wales and Northern Ireland is a slightly different picture with DBS checks, but we have Disclosure Scotland and PVGs here with Disclosure Scotland, and they have no issue with disclosures, including PVGs for people in the asylum process. So we certainly have obtained them for people, but other organizations have obtained them. Some things you may not be familiar with, the supporting documents, you do need to give official photo ID. And if you apply for asylum, you basically, whatever paperwork ID you have with you, when you arrive into the UK, you have to hand them into the Home Office and you don't get them back. So the only photo ID you will have is going to be one that's been issued by the Home Office. So if you're in the asylum process, you will probably have this one on the top, an applicant registration card, also known as an ARC card. So it looks unhelpfully like a driver's license, like any other document office issued by an authority. But there is a photo and ID.ID, and Disclosure Scotland are familiar with it and will accept it. If you have already got refugee status, then you get a biometric residence permit. If there are any migrants amongst us today, you probably will have one of these in your wallet as well. So any international student or migrant is issued a version of this. So again, it is official photo ID. You might also have, if you have refugee status, a convention travel document. This is the equivalent of a passport, looks like a passport. Not everyone will have it because you have to, just like a passport, you have to apply for it and pay for it. But it is also a valid ID. Some people may have obtained a UK driver's license, things you're more familiar with. But generally, these are the documents, ID documents, and you might need to name them to people when completing a disclosure application, because the documents that are named on the disclosure application will not necessarily be familiar to someone who's in the asylum process, but these ones will be. Okay, right. So to get into the nitty-gritty of involving refugee volunteers, quite apart from the legalese that we've spoken about so far, there is a consideration about what are the barriers, I have to say, though, before coming into this, there's quite a high level of volunteering activity amongst refugees and people seeking asylum, particularly amongst people seeking asylum, because you're not allowed to work while you're in the asylum process. So if you're in the asylum process, as you can be for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, it can be a soul-destroying state of limbo, a very non-developmental part of your life. You can do some studying, but if your English isn't quite good enough to get into college yet, then that can be really quite limited. So if you are an adult who's been working or a professional, you can really feel all your skills and professional identity being leached out of you throughout those years. And a lot of people will do volunteering to try and keep that sense of professional identity, professional self-respect. Social isolation obviously is a massive issue, especially quite a lot of people seeking asylum are single young men, and getting into a community setting and integrating into society other than the social club of your own community can be really quite tricky. So this is an amazing way to actually get to know Scottish people or people who are not from your own country or from different countries. So, okay, let me backtrack. I'm jumping onto another slide. So different barriers people can have quite often if you're in the asylum process or if you're a new refugee, your housing will be unstable, which means that the Home Office will assign you what they call no choice housing. So if you're in the asylum process, you'll be given an address. If you refuse to take on this address, you will be homeless. There will not be an alternative. So it can be in another city. In this case, it's going to be in Glasgow. It can be shared. You could have more than one single mother sharing a flat, a single mother in each room in a flat. People, if it's a multiple occupancy flat, people will be moved into the room next door without you being given any notice. So remember that tenants' rights don't apply to people seeking asylum in Home Office housing. So you're a single mother and a stranger is being moved into the room next door to you. Nobody told you. People just walk into the flat and you yourself can be moved to another flat with very little notice. So it's literally very destabilizing state to be in. And once you're given refugee status, you would think things would get better, but actually the letter that you receive telling that you've been granted refugee status, the second paragraph says, I have 3 weeks to find alternative housing. So it's also your notice of homelessness is the same letter. So you enter into the mainstream homelessness system with temporary housing. You might be in a hotel, you might be in a hostel, depending on your age and gender, for quite a long time. So it's a persistent instability of housing for years on end. Poverty is a massive issue. If the asylum process, as well as housing, your housing and utilities are covered by the Home Office, but your living allowance is around about £39 per week per person. So this is to cover your food, your clothing, your hygiene, cleaning, travel, everything. So if your all-day bus ticket in Glasgow, for example, last I checked, which was probably 2 years ago, was £4 something. So that's almost 80 to 90% of your daily allowance will be that one bus ticket. So volunteer expenses take on an entire new meaning in this case, and how you reimburse your volunteer expenses can be of critical importance for involving someone. Changes in immigration status You know, you are refused asylum, you become destitute, you put in a new claim, you have housing again, you're granted refugee status, you have to move into a hostel at short notice. So your immigration status is also a cause of instability in your life. And learning a new language, of course, this is not universal. Quite a few people seeking asylum actually do speak English. You may be from Zimbabwe. English actually is your language, well, pretty much your first language and certainly language of your education, or another Commonwealth country where English is the language of education. Quite a few people are highly educated and in English, so are reasonably comfortable, but quite a few people may have no formal schooling or formal schooling in another language and another script altogether. So learning English is a big part of integrating and finding opportunities. What I would say there is that it's perhaps a mind trick, but it's to think of people not as lacking English skills, but as English language learners. So it's a process. If people's English skills are not particularly great at the moment, they will improve. And actually, if they are given a chance to volunteer, they will improve a lot faster. And really have a good think about what is your role, how much is it really requiring, what level of English, you know, sort of, you can have, we've certainly spoken to people in charity shops saying, oh no, we need fluency in English. And you're thinking, how much English are you really using sorting goods in the charity shop or being supported? There's always a number of people. How critical is it really? But we've also had other opportunity providers saying we're looking for reception volunteers. We don't care about his level of English. If he's generally gregarious, understands a few phrases, all he's going to do is point people to different classes that we offer in this community center. Fine, you know, we don't mind. So it's sometimes a question of mindset and enabling, and perhaps buddying people with someone whose level of English is better until they improve. A lot of competing time commitments, which quite often are hidden from view because people in the asylum process are not allowed to work. It's easy to think of people having an entirely empty week with no commitments. I think if you worked with refugees for any length of time, you know that people are solicitors' appointments, home office interviews, they have to report to immigration. Their housing inspections happen a lot more regularly than the mainstream housing sector and housing associations that they'd have to be in for. ESOL classes that tend to be a few mornings a week or a few afternoons a week. And if you have refugee status, then your ESOL classes are obligatory and linked to your benefits. So if you miss an ESOL class, you will be sanctioned by the job centre. You will not get your benefits and you'll have to appeal for them to be reinstated. So really quite harsh limitations and commitments in your time. But we can, if you have any questions, if any of it sounds familiar or unfamiliar, we can talk about that at the end as well. So this one here, let me see if I can make it a bit bigger. No, I don't seem to be able to. Hold on. Whoopsie. Okay, right. Again, please don't try to read all the tiny writing on the screen. But I tried to divide, I guess we've looked at barriers so far, which is a very negative way of looking at it. So this is a more positive slide about what can we actually do to make sure these barriers are removed. So how can we actively welcome people? And I like that phrase, active welcome. I think we would all like to think of ourselves and our organizations, our practices as welcoming, but that can be quite passively. You know, if someone with disabilities applied to volunteer, of course, I would consider their application as perhaps something an organization may say, but do we actually actively reach out to a disability network, talk about what the needs of disabled volunteers are, and advertise our roles directly to those networks so that people hear of these opportunities, support people through the application process? So that's the idea I'm looking for in the idea of active welcome. Could we do that active welcome for people seeking asylum and for refugees? And I mean fairly simple things by that. So if you're recruiting, if you've got roles online, do you reach out to local refugee support groups? They exist all over Scotland now because of refugee resettlement. All local authorities are hosting smaller or larger numbers of Syrian refugees at the moment, and they will be very soon hosting people from Afghanistan in most local authorities in Scotland. People have started arriving, in fact, last weekend. So wherever there's a population, there will be grassroots groups supporting that population. So do reach out and find out who people are, invite people, invite the organization, invite the individuals, perhaps go out and join their events and just get to know what that community is like. If you're in Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, Aberdeen, Perth, Inverness, there are ESOL classes in Ayrshire as well for refugees in local colleges. Reach out to those colleges, find out who the ESOL coordinator is, ask if you can go in and speak to the students directly about your volunteering opportunities. Sometimes lectures, ESOL lectures, are quite happy to find a group activity outside of college. So if your museum and your gallery is opening, reach out to that ESOL teacher and see if their class wants to visit as a class during class hours as an English learning activity. And ESOL, you will find teachers very keen to do this sort of meaningful activity, meaningful integration activity with their classes, sort of to learn that lived community English. On the top right, is it easy to engage with your volunteering program? And really hardly any of these items here are refugee specific. It's generally inclusion practices, how long and complex is your application form? And I have to say, we haven't done very well in that area ourselves. This is something Scottish Refugee Council needs to improve as well. Are you completely reliant on internet access? Are your applications all online and digital, which may be great? It's actually, people are better at that now because we've all had to learn a bit more, but that was quite often a barrier. People seeking asylum, it would be very difficult for you to get your hands on a computer. So most people actually went to the library to access the internet and to check their emails. So they'll be checking maybe once a week. So that speed of communication, if you're writing today to invite somebody to a meeting on Thursday and you've just emailed them as opposed to phoning them, they pretty much would not get that message and miss your meeting. So you might be having to get on that phone, send that WhatsApp message, send a text, whatever it is, to find those alternative routes of getting to people. References, do you pick up references? How flexible can you be with them? If someone's been in the country for 2 months, where will they get that reference? So they might be, if they have an ESOL tutor, you may be able to do a list of suggestions to people, because people assume references have to be professionals ones. But if you are able to say to people, it could be a family friend, it could be someone abroad by email, it could be an ESOL tutor, it could be a caseworker. Or if you're really not able to provide references, that's fine, we'll involve you now, but maybe you yourself as a practitioner think about, are there some protections and safety measures I need to put around to allow for the fact that I've not been able to pick up references for this person? And how quickly and easily do you reimburse expenses, and do you explicitly and early on tell people you will reimburse their expenses? Otherwise that person is going to have some difficult choices to make about buying that bus ticket and may not choose to come to your optional meeting or your training sessions. But if they've been told in advance, then they'll be much more likely to even apply and consider to your role. If you give lunch expenses on top of that, then you will have a very, with SRC, we used to give £4.50, reimburse £4.50, £4.75 for lunch for each volunteer. That's practically doubling somebody's daily financial means if you're in the asylum process. So it really is, what is quite small to an amount of money to an organization is actually a massive contribution to somebody's ability to move around. If you reimburse, I don't know, £4 bus tickets and £3 for lunch, that's more than doubling somebody's daily income. That's for someone in the asylum process. If you have refugee status, you'll have the right to work, and if you're not working, you will have mainstream benefits. But if you're in the asylum process still, it's more or less 60% of the financial ability of someone who's on universal credit. So if you think of universal credit, already quite a limited amount of income, someone in the asylum process is practically half of that, so you're really much more limited. And no, child benefits, no other associated little benefits or funds will be available. Okay, and the one on the bottom right is your program Refugee Friendly, a very general title. Again, quite a few of these things are applicable to everyone, not necessarily someone in refugee status. But I would try to think of a step-by-step approach. So find out that local network or organization, invite them to your event, perhaps organize a joint event, meet people as participants at events first, and maybe be involved in ad hoc, one-off volunteering, group volunteering events, and then try to encourage people to apply for longer-term volunteering in your organization. So become known, become linked first, and involving someone at volunteer is sort of at the end of that continuum, not necessarily first off, will you apply or will you not apply? So those progression routes can be really critical. And you may find that your own experienced volunteers might be quite keen to buddy or mentor somebody who's having a slower introduction to the organization, either training them, supporting them, or supporting them with their English. We had someone recruit refugee volunteer once, and they were for an organization that was supporting elderly people who just left hospital and were settling back into their houses. And they recruited a young woman from Eritrea who spoke multiple languages, but not English. And the person she was volunteering to support had been a modern languages teacher in high school. They didn't have a language in common, but they were both multilingual, and they found something in common in that. And they had a very cordial, friendly relationship based mostly on sign language, and then just an affinity for each other. So things can work, perhaps a lot of trial and error in there, but these creative solutions are really good solutions. And really bottom left there, some clear I welcome refugees messaging in your website and your social media on significant days, or generally just sitting there on your website would always be welcome. I am coming to the end of my talk. I did warn that I never do 15 minutes. It's more an hour and I have got to cut it short. At Scottish Refugee Council, as some of you know, we do have a monthly volunteering information afternoon online at the moment, last Thursday of every month, except December, because that's Christmas and we don't want to compete with Christmas. If you're an organization, if you're wanting to recruit volunteers, come along, present them. You'll be in a breakout room with a group of people and talking to them about your organization, your roles, how to apply. Think of it as a stall, but a virtual stall, and in small groups, and people find them friendly and sociable. If you wanted to just come and see what it's like without committing to recruit or offer roles, you're more than welcome to come along as an observer. Every month we usually have a couple of organizations just coming along to observe, listening in, and then following on in later months with actually coming in and presenting opportunities. And that can be Scotland-wide. Mostly in practice, it's people from Glasgow. We have, again, Glasgow is a dispersal area, that's where people are, so there's that limitation, but we do welcome. And if it's an online volunteering role, by all means, come along and meet people. Here's our website, and there's quite a bit of information on our website. So this one on the very left is about the volunteering information afternoon. There's a link to register participants, but as an organization, you can also register, or you can just send us an email. The top tips document about involving refugee volunteers I was speaking of earlier is there on the second tab. You can find the details of it. A few little videos, I need more videos, and a few FAQs for people wanting to volunteer with us. But you may find that interesting as well, because we are also volunteer involving in organization. We do have some wording that you may have to look at, you may wish to look at, about refugees and asylum seekers, and you're welcome to volunteer, that sort of thing. And this is us. So myself and Roseanne, our volunteer development coordinators, Daniel, who's also here today, casework volunteer coordinator, and that's the team email and the organization's phone number, which I should take off the slide because the organization's not open at the moment. But the team email is a good one to aim for. And that's me today. So about 15 minutes to have a chat, hopefully. I will stop sharing and have a look at that chat and maybe see if David has an idea of how you want to run. I hope that was okay. Yeah.
Gün, thank you so much. And I'm just going to quote from Claire from Aberdeen, who put in the chat, brilliant, informative presentation. Thank you. I found particularly the an active welcome slide that you were talking about towards the end there, really, really useful as someone from an organisation who haven't been actively involved with refugees yet and have been thinking about it and wondering what the first steps are. And that was incredibly helpful. So thank you so much. But Claire also had a question, if I could find it. Claire says, I'd be interested to know more about the legal status of Syrian New Scots. Well, we can, sorry, I'm reading this all out, but it's there in the chat. Yeah, as well as people's experience supporting New Scots and perhaps any experience, feedback from Syrian New Scots themselves. Have you got any experience in that yourself, Gün or Dan?
Sure.
Do you want me to? So I think the legal status part of Syrian New Scots, I could answer that part. And then if there's anything that I might be missing, then if Gün, there's anything you know that I've maybe missed. But so the legal status, it's kind of the resettlement. It's people have come through the Syrian resettlement program, which is where they have applied to come to the UK. And so they don't go through the stage of being an asylum seeker, which most people go through the stage of seeking asylum and having this period of limbo. But it's also different because they're supported directly by city and town and area councils as well, by local authorities. So it's a wee bit different in that respect than most people who have refugee status have been through the asylum system. But that's the main difference I can think of. And the other question, I'm going to share something in the chat as well, because I think, was it Claire, did you have a question about networks to support New Scots and to support Syrian refugees to be able to speak to each other?
Yeah, sorry, I hope you don't mind if I muted myself. My video is not working, so I'm not being antisocial. Yeah, I kind of thank you first and foremost, because that was really, really useful to know. I've kind of bundled a whole bunch of questions into one in my excitement, so I appreciate that. I've kind of sent 3 messages and asked about 30 questions. Yes, so the main gist of it is I was just interested to know for people who are there, so Syrian New Scots is one category and people coming in as refugees is another. What networks there might be through the SRC or anywhere else to support them. So I know that if it sounds like people just get housed wherever, it might be nice for volunteers who are across Scotland, who share a background and a culture, to be able to keep in touch and support each other, especially through that language side, all of that stuff. I just wondered if there's anything that we can offer or point people towards when they get in touch with us, things like that.
Sure. I can't claim expertise for across Scotland, but I do actually have some information about Aberdeen in particular. So there's quite a few families who arrived through the Syrian resettlement programme in Aberdeen. They've been there for about 5 years, and there's a network called Shared Futures. I don't know if you've come across them.
Ah, okay. So I'm doing a thumbs up and you can't see me. Yes, I'm typing this all down, Shared Futures. Okay.
I'll put it into chat. So that's a network of representatives of different organisations across Aberdeen. So that includes the council, has a resettlement team, the police, Interfaith Scotland, various faith groups, the university, the mission church, and then the advice agency up there is called GREC.
Yes.
Grampian. So, and Dave Black, who is the manager there, is involved in Shared Futures. So they organize quite a few events online at the moment, but ordinarily in the Mission Church for New Scots as a collective. So New Scots, if anyone's not familiar, is Scottish Government language for people seeking asylum and refugees in Scotland. So the Scottish Government's refugee integration strategy is called the New Scots Strategy. So as Daniel said, people who are outside of Glasgow and have arrived through the resettlement programme, the main difference is that they arrive as refugees. They are given refugee status usually at a refugee camp elsewhere, and they will make their application directly to UNHCR, who will assess their application. So they've been asylum seekers, except not in the UK. They've been doing that in a refugee camp in Turkey or Lebanon or elsewhere. And so they arrive and with access to mainstream benefits and social housing immediately. And usually the councils who have agreed to house them will have a resettlement worker. It's someone called Shauna Bell in Aberdeen. I can get you these details, Claire. It's been 5 years now, so some councils have actually stopped any direct support to New Scots. They feel it's been long enough. And some councils are actually gearing up to take more people. It was first Syrian people and then people affected by the Syrian crisis, so a broader category. And there is already an Afghan resettlement, the shape of which we don't know exactly, but people are arriving. And this is also going to be around Scotland, a lot more people, unaccompanied young people going through the asylum process, arriving. Yeah, Gail, you've got your hand up, I think. Did we answer everything, Claire? There was, Daniel, I don't know, I think you put the detail for the New Scots Connect map, which is a Scottish Refugee Council online network that you can join. There's a map and the forum. So the map is for refugee supporting organizations. You put your details there, and people looking for support in your area can find you. The forum is like a chat forum. It's on a Basecamp format. So you apply, and if you're accepted, so anyone who's not profit making but is offering services or would like to offer services can join, and you can put opportunities up there. You can see offers there. And our communities team just today, I think, put an offer for an online network of organizations who'd like to support Afghan refugees across Scotland, to put in where they are and their details, so become networked in a fairly casual way. This has hit everybody out of the blue, so the responses are in development. So by all means, join that New Scots Connect forums, have a look at the conversation, and you will see these opportunities there. Sorry, David, is it okay to go to Gail next?
Absolutely. I was just going to say, Gail, please ask your question.
Oh, thank you. I actually was going to ask exactly what you were just saying, Gün, about it coming from nowhere. We are an organisation working with refugees and asylum seekers, but I kind of phrase it as we do the social stuff. So we do ESOL lessons and we do befriending and things like that. I'm having, for us, a reasonably high level of inquiries from people specifically wanting to volunteer to support Afghans, which I think is wonderful in one way, but frustrating in another, because there are already refugees here from other places who could also use that support. So I'm kind of trying to find a way to say that, would you consider coming forward anyway, because we don't yet have any New Scots from Afghanistan, but we will. Everyone will soon. And I guess I was wanting to know, do you know of organisations actively looking to recruit people right now to support Afghans? Because I think we can use some of our inquiries, but I suspect if this goes on, we're not going to be able to use them all. And they do come to us. As in Edinburgh, we're one of the organisations, one of very few, that does actually work with refugees. Any ideas?
I really think that I'll put Riza's email in the chat, or Daniel, perhaps you can do that, Riza Karimi. who's our communities team member, and he's just put that Google form link for just to collate information about who's offering support, who's asking for support. So a picture can emerge there. But yes, I mean,
if we have too many, there's no reason for us to hold on to the names if we don't need them. So we can pass them on.
Yeah, but I share your frustration, because it is very difficult whenever there's a crisis. Lots of people come forward, but if you have a certain member of staff, you can only support so many volunteers. You can't suddenly. So yes, 500 volunteers, excellent. I will change the world now. It just doesn't work that way.
Okay. Thank you very much for the question, Gail. That's great. There's a question from Holly in the chat, and it's saying, are there any special considerations for recruiting board members as opposed to general volunteers?
I'm not particularly involved in board member recruitment, but at SRC we do always, it's our policy to have a minimum number of people with lived experience of asylum, and we've certainly had people who are still in the asylum process sitting on our board. So I would certainly use the same general guidance for volunteering, but consider things along the lines of perhaps offering people shadowing opportunities, offering or finding out how people can get some training on board skills, that sort of thing, upskilling people first before actually throwing them in the deep end as board members. I feel like sometimes there can be a bit of an imbalance depending on the type of your organization. So, we want someone with finance expertise and we want 2 refugees. It's not an amazing way to approach it. You'd hopefully want people to be involved because they have something specific to offer, as opposed to feeling like I am the token in this setting. So that background, I mean, any initiative for inclusion really has to do the work in the background. I feel that you really give people opportunities to be included and upskilled so that when they are involved in these positions of responsibility, and that's not just for refugees, for anybody, then you feel on a par with that, you are a peer of the people you are sitting alongside. The CRER used to do political shadowing schemes. At SRC, certainly in the past, we've done particular volunteer board recruitment drives when we've said, would you like to shadow our board? If you have lived experience of asylum, would you like to shadow our board for a period of 6 months? And you will be assigned a board member who is your mentor. And certainly not everybody applies to join our board at the end of the process, but hopefully if they feel this is for them, they might apply to join our board or other boards. So it's that sort of initiative is what I would think would work. Gabrielle, I can see you thinking. I don't know if you've got something to add there as well.
If anyone else has got any other questions, please put your hand up. I'm just quite aware of the time here. No, okay. Well, I think I'll round up. I'd like to say again, thank you so much. That was a fascinating case study. It feels like we've only just scraped the surface in our time here, but it was really, really useful. So thank you very much, Gün and Daniel. Just to round up, I'd like to say thank you all for attending. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Erin will be whizzing out an evaluation form because they're really useful for us to find out how these sessions are going, what you're enjoying and what you'd like to see in future. And also, if you're not already, please do follow us, follow Make Your Mark campaign, follow the VON campaign and the VON team as well. Yeah, thank you once more. Hopefully see you all again in the near future. So thank you very much.
Fantastic. Nice to meet everybody, and I will get the presentation, a few links to Erin, and hopefully they can be shared as well. But it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.